We see Tish visiting Alonzo Hunt in the prison. Alonzo, whom she fondly calls Fonny, is Tish's childhood friend and current lover. Tish is there to tell him monumental news. She's carrying Fonny's child. At first, Fonny is concerned, especially about how the child will be raised, but after Tish assures him not to worry, Fonny finally allows himself to laugh. Having a family with the woman he loves is all he ever wanted, but his incarceration puts a blot on his dreams. When he asks Tish about what she's going to do, she says she's going to get help from their families. She's going to work hard to provide for herself. She promises he's going to be out of prison before she gives birth. Tish's narration and flashbacks provide context for the majority of the movie. The first narration is about Fonny and who he is. Tish says Fonny used to go to vocational school, but eventually dropped out to become a sculptor. He worked odd jobs to support himself and rented a basement apartment where he could focus on his artistry. They lived during a time when Black people were heavily discriminated against. So Fonny, finding his passion in sculpting, helps fight off the notion that kids like them ain't worth anything. In the next scene, we see Tish feeling nervous as she waits for her mother, Sharon, to come home. She plans to tell her family about the pregnancy, but she's uncertain on how they'll respond. To her immense relief, Sharon is accepting and supportive. Soon, Joseph and Ernestine, Tish's father and sister, learn about her pregnancy too. At first, Frank is concerned, like any father would. He remembers when Tish and Fonny would look for apartments so they could settle on their own. Learning about the pregnancy has made him realize the couple is serious about living together despite their young age. Nonetheless, Joseph is happy for his baby girl, and even asks if he can be the one to tell Frank, Fonny's father, about this. On that note, Sharon suggests they should invite the Hunt family over to have a little celebration for this good news. After a few minutes, the Hunt family arrives. Frank greets everyone warmly, while Mrs. Hunt and Fonny's sisters look more polite and stiff. It becomes evident that the women of the Hunt family deeply resent what happened to Fonny, and that they look down on Tish. They think that if Fonny only finished his studies, he wouldn't have gone to jail. Mrs. Hunt, a highly religious and self-righteous woman, says she prays that the Lord would bring her boy back to the light. But then sometimes she thinks this is the Lord's plan to punish her boy for his sins. Mrs. Hunt continues to share her pious opinions about her son's imprisonment, which prompts Frank to insult her. To de-escalate the situation, one of Fonny's sisters asks why they're invited there. Tish stands up and bravely announces her pregnancy. Frank is happy about the news, but Mrs. Hunt looks angry. She asks about who's going to be responsible for the baby. This question, although poorly worded, may have been asked out of concern, given the context, and is inherently valid. But what Mrs. Hunt says next removes all doubt that she's always looked down on Tish. She calls Tish lustful, and the reason for her son's downfall. The child Tish is carrying is made out of wedlock, which makes it a product of sin and therefore immoral. Frank can't take it anymore. He hits his wife, much to the surprise of everyone. He knows about his wife's weak heart, but at that moment he considers his wife heartless for saying those words. Then he leaves the house, followed by Joseph. The sisters try to defend their mother, but it only shows that they're parroting Mrs. Hunt's skewed views. Ernestine defends her sister before sending their guests out of their house. Sharon grabs Mrs. Hunt's arms before she leaves and reminds her that what she just cursed is her and Frank's grandchild, innocent of the ways of the world. She should remember that every time she thinks the child was made in sinful ways. We see a flashback on how Tish and Fonny started being lovers. At first, Tish only saw Fonny as her childhood friend, but it all changed when he invited her to their first date and gave a sculpture to her mother as a gift. Tish realized when they first made love that he was serious about her, and she felt the same way for him. This gives more nuance as to why Tish is too adamant to prove Fonny's innocence. She's known him for a long time. She knows he can never commit the crime he's being charged with, and her love for him gives her the drive to do what she can. Next, Tish narrates the offense that Fonny is being accused of. A woman named Victoria Rogers claims to have been attacked by Alonzo Fonny Hunt inside her home, in the most abominable and lascivious manner. However, the circumstances of the crime are too improbable to happen. The only reason Fonny is being charged is because of the testimony of Officer Bell, who swears that he saw Fonny run away from the crime scene. According to the justice system, it's up to the accused to prove, and pay to prove, his innocence. This is the crux of Tish's dilemma. She knows Fonny could not have committed the crime, but she lacks the financial resources to prove it. Hayward, the lawyer who took the case, is doing his best to win the case, but the odds are stacked against them. Victoria Rogers only pointed at Fonny in a lineup of suspects due to the urging of Officer Bell. She isn't actually sure who the culprit is. Hayward could have convinced the victim to retract her statement, but she has disappeared and is suspected to have fled to Puerto Rico. On the other hand, Fonny has an alibi during the time of the crime. He was with Tish and a friend named Daniel Carty. The problem with this alibi is that Tish's testimony is weak due to her romantic involvement with him, and Daniel has a previous conviction, making him an unreliable witness. Tish visits Fonny again to tell him about the disappearance of Victoria. It's understandable to see Fonny become dejected at this development of events. For the first time, he raises his voice on Tish, letting out all his doubts and hopelessness in his situation. Tish remains calm, even though she's upset herself. In another flashback, we see the time when Fonny meets Daniel Carty. Daniel had just been released from prison after 2 years. Daniel looked cheerful and happy to see Fonny again. But in Fonny's apartment, Daniel's whole demeanor changed as he recounts his experience inside the prison. While Tish was cooking dinner, Daniel relayed his experiences while incarcerated. At the time of his arrest, Daniel had some illegal substances with him, but he pleaded guilty to car theft for a shorter sentence. During his time in jail, he's seen unspeakable acts done to prisoners, especially to black men. In his words, they were playing with him just because they could. His experiences changed him a lot, and he'd developed uncertainty about his future. Fonny comforted his friend, telling him he'd be all right. Fonny also shared his worries about the future. At that moment, he had 2 important things in his life: his sculpting work and Tish. He was considering going abroad for better prospects, but he was simply scared. It wasn't cowardice, but rather he was scared of the idea of him and Tish apart and what could happen to either of them. It wasn't easy living together in a time when people looked down on them because of their skin color, so how much harder it would be to face those challenges alone. In the present, we can see that Tish's baby bump is already showing. She should feel happy and excited, but her worries are causing her nightmares. Sharon comforts her daughter. She tells her to remain strong for the sake of the baby. Tish gets a job at the perfume counter in the department store. She does her best to endure standing all day long, smiling at customers and hoping they would buy perfumes. One afternoon, Ernestine meets with Tish to tell her some news. Victoria has been located, and indeed, she's fled to Puerto Rico. This means Tish must flesh out more money so someone can go there and convince Victoria to modify her statement. Tish shows some signs of dejection, wondering if they'll ever get over this. Ernestine consoles her sister. Hayward, their lawyer, is about to talk to Daniel to get his statement. He's doing his best to at least secure a trial date for his client. Tish narrates how, at first, they didn't trust Hayward. To them, the lawyer is just another white male with a degree. But as time passes by, Tish realizes that Hayward genuinely cares. This is the first time the attorney has taken this kind of case, and it's awakened him to the realities of the justice system, that the system just doesn't favor someone like Fonny, no matter how innocent they are. Meanwhile, Joseph and Frank discuss money matters related to Fonny's case. Frank is starting to lose hope for his boy and for his grandchild. Joseph remains optimistic that they can gather enough money so they can send someone to Puerto Rico, and that they can raise their grandchild like how they raised their kids. These 2 fathers are not evil at their core. However, their situation gives them no choice but to resort to illegal activities just to earn enough money. They begin selling stolen garments. They don't tell Tish about this, knowing it'll only add stress to her pregnancy. Tish visits Fonny again. Tish's big round belly brings comfort and laughter to Fonny, because it means his family is doing well despite the challenges. The baby is already kicking, causing Tish unexpected pain. Although worried, Fonny cracks a joke about it, making both of them laugh. It's such a good feeling to laugh. This is their reprieve from the situation they're going through. We see another flashback in which Tish narrates the events of when their baby was conceived. Earlier that day, Tish and Fonny visited a warehouse that was intended to be converted to loft apartments. Levy, the landlord, showed them around. The place looked desolate and badly in need of restoration. Tish didn't have a lot of confidence in the place, but Fonny was eager to show her the place's potential. They could start their family there, although it would be a rough start for sure. But Fonny wanted something big for him and Tish, and for their future. Their previous search for apartments failed because no one wanted to rent to them. And although Levy's place wasn't initially ideal to start a family, Fonny recognizes the kindness in the landlord's intention to rent to them. Levy explained that race didn't matter to him, but he loved seeing loving couples dreaming big for their future. Eventually, Tish was convinced that this was the beginning of her life with Fonny. Later, Tish was buying ingredients for dinner when a man showed indecent intentions with her. Tish kept avoiding him, but the man was insistent. Fonny saw the man and threw him out of the grocery store. That was when they first met Officer Bell, who spotted the commotion. Despite Tish's truthful explanation, Officer Bell insisted on taking Fonny to the precinct. Thankfully, the old woman who owned the store came to their defense. It was clear that Officer Bell was prejudiced, and he didn't like the interruption. It could be said that he might have found a chance to incarcerate Fonny when the case with Victoria Rogers happened. Despite this unsavory turn of events, Tish and Fonny went to their favorite restaurant. They ended the night in passion, tenderly holding each other. In the present, we see Tish experiencing abdominal pains as she nears her due date. Her father supports her wholeheartedly, while her mother has flown to Puerto Rico. Sharon is determined to find Victoria and convince her to change her statement. Fortunately, she meets her. In an empty alleyway, Sharon talks to Victoria, trying to know the woman who accused Fonny of the crime. Victoria looks and sounds like she's nearing the breaking point, especially when she mentions the R word. Sharon pleads with her to reconsider her statement. It's not right when Victoria just picks an innocent man out of a lineup when she doesn't really know who the suspect is. But Victoria says she was told to pick Fonny out. And because she was traumatized and scared, she did. Sharon gently touches Victoria to show empathy, but this triggers Victoria's trauma. An old lady comes to Victoria's aid and takes the screaming woman away. Sharon is left in despair as she realizes their last and only hope has been lost. Tish visits Fonny to tell him this devastating news. Fonny has always known there's little chance of him being proven innocent despite all efforts. Still, he valiantly shows Tish that he's hopeful, that once he gets out, he's going to embrace his being an artisan. It's heartbreaking for Tish to see Fonny doing his best to be optimistic about their future when they both know their bleak and unfair reality. Soon, Tish gives birth to a baby boy. Fonny has no choice but to take a plea. At the end of the movie, we see Tish with her son, Alonzo Jr., visiting Fonny in the prison's visiting area. The boy doesn't seem to mind his father's situation, but he does hope for the time when his father comes home. Against all odds, Tish and Fonny have found a way to enjoy any semblance of normalcy in their family.